I want to turn a little bit. I had a good conversation yesterday with Josh Orton from Progressives United about what's happening with this third way battle, and it sort of ties in some respects into President Obama's inequality speech. But let's talk a little bit about the third way, because I know for you're just as passionate about this as I am.
How long do you think we can go without mocking them and making fun of them in any conversation we have about them?
I think it's very, very short. I don't think we have very much distance between. But I mean, it's it's fascinating that this is happening at this time. I think that we're seeing this sort of what I think is a fairly effective pushback, and much of it has to do with the composition of the Senate right now. We hear President Obama come out and speak to income inequality, and I know that we had traded that piece in the Huffington Post by Lincoln Mitchell, who had written that sort of with some measure of astonishment that President Obama is now taking the time to talk about income inequality. I guess it's never too late, but in some respects, I mean.
Some respects, it actually can be too late.
Yeah.
I mean, rhetorically, it's very important, because right now, this is why you see third way striking out, and you've had a couple comments made. I mean, it was fun to watch Chuck Schumer make a comment attacking people on the left on Wall Street, and then go and pretty much beg for forgiveness at Daily Kos with a diary there. Because of all the blowback he got from that. But you can see the sort of Wall Street, and the sort of Wall Street apologists, and I mean for the worst aspects of Wall Street, because Chuck Schumer tries to make a case in that piece, as do others, that not everybody on Wall Street is bad, as if that's what we're all saying, that everybody on Wall Street is bad. We're saying there's some really bad people running some of the biggest firms right now. There's some really bad regulations that have allowed banks to become too big to fail, and that pretended that the Glass-Steagall was some outdated concept, when clearly having commercial and investment banks being separate because of the risk investment banks are willing to take was a pretty sound concept that ruled us for a long time. I mean, these are the things we're saying. We're not saying you're saying every single person who works on Wall Street is evil. No one's saying that. And so it's but in any case, this was something that this would have been the perfect thing, for example, when we've had these conversations about President Obama sort of giving in on the stimulus and asking for less. Wouldn't this have been the message to have alongside that stimulus, that we needed to put people back to work? We had enormous income inequality. The banks had just blown up the economy, and that we needed to make sure that there was a stimulus big enough to help lessen income inequality, put people. I mean, it would have been this strong populist message when he had 59 senators and a House majority. And I promise you, if he'd pushed this kind of thing, this kind of messaging, 2010 would never have happened. All right, and at least in the manner in which it did. But you're right. There still, in my opinion, are things he can do now. And I'm writing a piece right now where I'm kind of outlining three of the things. But in terms of getting legislation passed, obviously there's very little he could do.
Right.
But it's really disingenuous to get up and have that speech when you're trying to get fast track authority on the transpartisan. Or whatever the hell.
Trans-Pacific Partnership, and
thank you. I was listening to the words.
And today, Annie Lowrey in the New York Times reports that the House and Senate are supposedly nearing an agreement that would provide for fast track. Now, I had read, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, that there was 100 some odd Democrats, maybe around 130, and then maybe about another 25, 27 Republicans who had committed to fighting fast track.
Right.
But I mean, this TPP we've spoken about on this program. I'm going to try and have somebody else on again. There's only so much we know about this, but what we do know at the heart, essentially, it eliminates
gives multinational corporations a lot more power, and literally almost the power to override sovereign nations.
No, not almost. I mean, literally the power to override, or basically say, if you're going to pass labor protections, if you're going to pass environmental protections, if you're going to pass consumer protections, then you have to pay us X number
That's just
of
amazing.
dollars based upon our profit projections. And we've seen some of that in NAFTA. We've seen instances where the Canadian government has had to pay money to U.S. corporations that anticipated making more profit there, but couldn't because of some of their environmental regulations. We've seen it go the other way. We also know
we've tried this crap. It's just amazing to me. We've done this for 20 years now. And I invite some of these people that think this is a brilliant idea. Why don't you take a drive through Youngstown or somewhere like that? It's not to say that we wouldn't have been at certain disadvantages to countries that are willing to have slave, labor essentially, or not really essentially, have that, and we would have lost some of our manufacturing base. But we've literally put it on the express train in this country through the trade deals we've passed. We've literally destroyed. We've done what Walmart's done to certain towns or many towns, and just emptied them out. And that you could stand there and make an argument about how we need to fight income inequality and then support this thing. I mean, you're either being completely disingenuous, or let's just use the word, you're lying, or they've got a really mixed up understanding of what this thing does.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of disingenuousness involved in this. Now, the one thing that I wonder, I haven't yet seen anybody write about this, but I anticipate we'll see it over the coming weeks or so, is Jack Lew announced, I think he was at the Pew, the Pew Charitable Trust. He announced that supposedly financial regulations that emanate from this country will not be watered down as a function of this trade deal and another trade deal that we are striking. And both of these are being done and negotiated completely in secret. To the extent that we know what's in them is only because somebody has leaked certain chapters of this massive deal, or because individual members of the House have actually gotten some draft stuff from from corporate representatives who are involved. I mean, so Congress has not even seen any of this yet. And Jack Lew announced at sometime earlier this week, that Dodd-Frank regulations will not be watered down as a function of this. And what that tells us is that, assuming that he's telling us the truth, but nevertheless, that were those financial regulations included in this, and I'm not convinced they won't be, frankly, but that this is a dynamic that's going to take place in other areas in terms of so-called intellectual property, in terms of environmental regulations, in terms of consumer protections. So we're going to see the lowest common denominator, the weakest of these laws.
Price gouging on medicine, and I mean, it's sickening what could end up happening under this.
Yes, these weakest of these laws, wherever they are around the globe, or at least amongst the partners that have signed on to this, the weakest one is then going to become not just the baseline, but it's going to become the ceiling. And whether or not an individual country has violated and sort of attempted through their democratic process to supersede these standards, a corporate board, a board made up literally of corporate lawyers who were rotated through.
Kind of like Third Way's board?
Yeah, well, yeah, let's talk about this, because this is part and parcel of the same thing. The Third Way is very supportive of the TPP. These are the people who are out there lobbying for fast track. The reason why they want fast track ostensibly is to give the president authority to pass this trade deal. There's another way to do that. That is have Congress know what's in this deal and take a whip count. But they don't want any real debate on this. They don't want the ability for a filibuster. They don't want the ability for amendments to fix certain parts of this. So we've got this part of this corporate establishment, of which Third Way is not simply a part of, but is completely indicative of.
Well, they on the Democratic side of the aisle, they're at the epicenter of it, and they're the ones pushing for cutting, basically privatizing part of Social Security. They're pushing for cuts to Medicare, and they're pushing for trade deals like this. They're sort of the remnants of the old DLC that's been completely eliminated. Most of these terrible Congress members, a lot of them who were the worst on some of these issues, were kicked out in 2010. Shockingly, people on the progressive side weren't that motivated to come out and vote for their own congressman. And but these guys literally have no constituency but a bunch of billionaires and a bunch of people, on Morning Joe and sitting around in Washington D.C. Together, and a bunch of investment bankers, some of whom have already paid huge corporate fines, and the whole board's made up of investment bankers. And again, this is not, I'm not saying all investment bankers are evil, but these guys have certain interests, right? And they're at third way, basically trying to pretend that the Democratic Party, that populism is crazy. Oh my God, it's just Elizabeth Warren and Bill de Blasio, these two morons wrote in their Wall Street Journal op-ed. As if nothing, those are the only two populist wins, right? It wasn't, for example, it wasn't Newt Gingrich who got as much traction as he did by going populist himself and going after Mitt Romney for coming into towns
right.
and places and destroying them by firing people. You didn't have people like Sherrod Brown in Ohio winning and Tom Harkin and Tammy Baldwin. I don't remember Wisconsin or Ohio or Iowa being considered deep blue states. Not to mention you've got Mark Begich signing up for increasing Social Security right now, and plenty of others. So in the end, they're giving a completely inaccurate picture of where they see the writing on the wall. The vast majority
right.
of the Democratic Party
yeah.
is against this trade deal, believes we should add to Social Security, as Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown and Tom Harkin and the rest have said. Believe that we should be. There are plenty of ways, right? Medicare is spending way too much money, and why is it spending that? Is it the care that it's giving to people, or are we overpaying providers, or are we refusing to have bulk negotiate for prescription drugs to bring down the cost? Are we refusing to re-import drugs to bring down the cost? And there's plenty of ways the cost can be brought down for these programs without hurting people. But that's not what these guys want because Big Pharma's on their board.
Right.
They don't want to cut away any of their profits. The Medicare cuts they're talking about come from you and me. And
we should make it clear that the notion that this is not about them saying that in some way populism is not going to be helpful from a political standpoint for the Democrats. I've told this story I think many times on this program, but it bears repeating that someone who is a very big supporter of the program and been very supportive of this program over the years. She had written me years ago in 2008 about an exchange she had with Bob Rubin at a fundraiser for, I think it was for a theater. Aside from telling the story of how Bob Rubin,
or as Bob Rubin calls it, a theater.
Right. Well, there's two aspects of this. So one part is just sort of an interesting story that I think is really indicative of who people like Bob Rubin are. Apparently, he was really pissed when he got to the fundraiser because he had been stuck in traffic in Manhattan in the town car that he was being driven in. And
You mean he wasn't on the bus?
He had called the mayor's office to complain about the traffic and had spoken to the assistant mayor to complain about the traffic. And when she asked him, where were you when you were stuck in traffic? And he just, I had no idea. I mean, the guy travels these streets without any concept of where he is, but picks up the phone to call the mayor's office to complain about the traffic. Just this sort of notion that he's living in his own private Idaho, except for Idaho for him is really just sort of more like his own
it's a car
private
and
Davos.
driver in like interchangeable cities of the world.
Indeed.
He could have been in Hong Kong or London or, I'm surprised he didn't call the mayor of Shanghai by mistake.
Right, exactly. And so she was talking to him about who she supported, and at that time it was John Edwards. And the guy said, Bob Rubin said, that can't happen. I mean, he's a populist. And, put aside whether or not John Edwards was sincere in that regard, there is a tremendous fear. I mean, make no doubt about it. This is about them fearing a populist resurrection in the Democratic Party that
That's
they
right.
are consciously trying to subjugate because that is not where their interests lie. And for them...
No, it's indirect. I mean, when you get to the point where you don't know where you are in traffic and you don't exactly know what your car and driver has taken you, but it's all cool, you've really gotten to that point where it's in direct contravention to your interests, because all your
Absolutely.
interests are amassing more wealth and power for yourself. It's not really about paying the bills anymore, is it?
Absolutely.
Um,
And
and that's
and the reality is that for the Democratic Party, for the Democratic establishment, unlike the Republican establishment, the left brand of populism is a far greater threat to the Democratic establishment and to the center, so-called center left of the Democratic Party, than right-wing populism is, because right-wing populism really rarely runs at odds with the right-wing agenda. Maybe you see it on immigration on some level because it takes the form of nativism and xenophobia. But beyond that, it is rare that there's a conflict there. It is at the heart of the conflict in the Democratic Party, and that's why these guys are out there. Josh had,
and I would say it's basically, to me right now, it's a fight between those who believe. I mean, it really breaks down very clearly on clear sort of lines. So those who believe that since the time of FDR, that government's not an outdated concept. It is the best thing out there, the federal government, to protect people economically, to make sure that rapacious industries aren't destroying the environment, aren't hurting people, and those who believe in sort of these neoliberal fantasies, to use their language, that you don't need to regulate, you just provide little incentives, and businesses then will do the right thing. And these guys have led this mass effort, and I think this is where a lot of this war is being fought. Certainly Social Security is part of it, which is it's a war on whether we're going to have faith in the government, and the government is going to be what we believe is an instrument of equality, or we're going to privatize everything, right, and throw everything into the free market because the free market is king. And I think that's it. These guys are the ones who are trying to privatize our schools.
right.
So that they can profit from it. I came across something I wanted to say before you kicked me off the show, because I know time is we're drawing to an end here. But a group that I've become a fan of, which is called In the Public Interest, which has these reports they put out pointing out these privatization nightmares. And they just released a report, and Gawker had an article up that was really interesting. And they just sort of bullet pointed these things. Chicago, Cincinnati, thankfully, was going to do this, and it got voted down this past election, but Chicago under Rahm Emanuel privatizing their parking meters, which has been a disaster. The price goes up for people, accountability and any transparency disappear. They just tell you, we don't need to show you our what we're doing. We don't need to tell you stuff. People's wages get lowered. They've got this I'll just read the top of this bullet point list here. Los Angeles County continually renewed its $3 million contract with a firm called Wings of Refuge to place foster children, despite numerous reports of kids going to abusive homes where they were beaten and locked away for days on end. And they kept doing it. And you go through this list at Gawker, you'll find numerous things of this, and they'll remind you of everything that you know about in the news. They'll also remind you of when you privatize things like, let's say, setting up a government website for health care,
Right.
Instead of doing it in-house. They screw that up too. It's this whole myth, and I guess I'll just end by saying this, that this to me is what I'm waiting for from Obama. Besides opposing and I may just be waiting forever, of course.
Right.
But besides opposing this trade deal, and besides saying Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown and these guys are right, we need to be adding to Social Security, because this is one of the few things that protects people, as guaranteed pensions have disappeared. Talking about the income inequality we have out there right now, that we need to stop this fantasy that privatizing things works, and that the private sector, as we've been told for 30 years now, is more efficient than government. No, Medicare is a hell of a lot more efficient than private insurance, because they don't pay bloated salaries to executives who don't do anything, and they don't have overhead up the wazoo because they don't care. And they don't spend all their money on marketing. And this is what we're going, and this is a battle taking place. You can make a difference, whoever is listening here, because this isn't just federal. This is going on in cities and towns and states near you, where this war by these guys, mostly guys on Wall Street, that just wish to make more money by privatizing everything. That's the side that Third Way is on.
Right.
And that's the side their board members are on. They want to privatize everything from your Medicare becoming vouchers to your Social Security being put in the stock market to your local benches, parking meters, parks, and anything else that you use on a daily basis, transportation, and the rest. Does the government do it better, or do they do it better? And the fact is that Reagan had it wrong. It's the government that does it better, and you could see that if you look at that and get past the myth again and again and again about how inefficient, corrupt, and the rest of big business is. We've had plenty of examples in the last decade or so, from Enron to AIG, haven't we? So, okay,
Exactly.
I'm done with my rant. So I want to see Obama. That's, to me, is the third plank that we need to see from Obama, is to stop speaking like a conservative and talking about, business does a better job here. They do not.
And frankly, at this point, talk is cheap. I mean, literally, it is cheap for him. There is no cost for President Obama to speak with some measure of populism. The reality is that we've got to see it play out when it comes to things like the budget. We've got to see it come out in issues like appointments. Now that he has a clear path to nominees and particularly judges. And we have to see it in things like the TPP. I mean, this is a really big deal that I think has really been covered, and to a certain extent it's because there's simply no information about it. But what we know is enough, I think, to alarm people. And I would argue, that frankly, it's and maybe I'm deluding myself, but to also see some of it. I mean, to the extent if there is any sincerity on behalf of the libertarians who don't want to see corporate giveaways, to the Tea Partiers who are afraid of a one world government. I mean, the TPP should be their biggest nightmare. And I'm not going to hold my breath, but it is. This is something that we should be seeing just a lot more. This is one of those few areas where I feel like a transpartisan coalition is called for because I think it could be effective. But we've got to watch this fast track. It's just absolutely crucial. But Cliff, we're out of time. As always, a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. I feel a little sad because I don't feel like we spent quite enough time mocking Third Way.
I know, but I did.
Maybe we can make that like a weekly feature. Can we do that?
I think they're going to probably lay low for a little bit. Although Josh Orton had a great, he had a great theory that this was also a function of them basically needing fundraising. That this is a sign of their weakness, because why else would you come out with such a stupidly timed attack on on someone who is ascendant in the Democratic Party? But hope springs eternal in that regard.